My name is Rowan Harker. I am a freight train conductor assigned to the northernmost line that still cuts through the Canadian wilderness. The company calls it the Polaris Route, though most of us who've worked it long enough just call it what it really is: miles of iron and ghosts. The track runs from Dawson's Gate to a small port town called Kelm Bay, threading through boreal forests, frozen lakes, and valleys no one bothers to map anymore. Up here, rules aren't written in manuals. They're carved into you by the things that happen when you ignore them. And the first rule, the one everyone learns fast, is never ride through the fog without a light on every car. When I took this job 12 years ago, I thought those stories were just old-timer talk. Men who'd spent too long in the cold, mistaking steam for spirits. I was wrong. The first time I broke that rule, I saw something I still can't fully explain. That night, the schedule had shifted because of a snowstorm near White Elk Pass. Dispatch told me to keep rolling until I cleared the ridge, then wait out the weather. My engineer, Caleb, was an old Cree man who barely spoke, except to hum when the train was running smooth. Around midnight, the fog began to gather, a rolling, pale wall that swallowed the front of the engine like surf. I reached for the auxiliary light switch, but one of the bulbs had blown earlier that week, and I'd been too lazy to swap it. The cars behind us disappeared into the white. I should have stopped. I didn't. Through the window, I saw movement along the tree line, shapes pacing the train, too fluid for wolves, too big for wolves. At first, I thought it was a trick of the mist, until one of them turned its head. Its face wasn't right. The eyes reflected light where no light should have reached. Caleb stopped humming. He whispered something under his breath, something in Cree I didn't understand, and then spat onto the floor. "You let them know we see them," he said quietly. "Now they can follow." We made it through that stretch without stopping, but when I went back to check the cars at Kelm Bay, frost had bloomed across every door latch, even the ones in the heated caboose. The frost patterns looked like handprints pressed from the outside. That's when Caleb told me the second rule: never look directly into the snow between the trees when it moves against the wind. It's easy to forget how alone you are on the Polaris Route. There are no signals past kilometer post 1D7, no cell service, and the radio sometimes picks up transmissions that don't exist. Static mixed with words you almost recognize. The company insists it's atmospheric interference. Every new hire believes that until they work their first winter run. 3 years ago, a rookie named Darren ignored Rule 3, never stop for lights that aren't yours. It was supposed to be a short cargo haul, fuel drums and mining equipment bound for the northern fields. At Yo-2500 he radioed dispatch, said he saw a red lantern swinging on the track ahead, so he slowed. That was his last transmission. By morning, we found his train still idling, every door open. His boots were on the ballast beside the rail. The snow around them was melted in perfect ovals, as if something warm had stood there watching. They pulled his file from the system the next day and reassigned his route to me. Caleb refused to go. He said the land keeps what it's owed. I didn't argue. I took the run alone. The first half was uneventful, until kilometer post 212, where the line curves around a frozen lake called Hallowmere. Locals say that lake doesn't thaw, not even in July. I'd just checked the gauges when the radio crackled again, though I hadn't keyed the mic. A faint voice drifted through the static. "Keep your lights off." I froze. The voice sounded like Darren's. I'd heard enough recordings of his reports to recognize the tone. Flat, amused, always slightly tired. But there was no trace of static in that voice. It came clean through the line, like someone standing beside me. "Keep your lights off," it repeated softer. "They're watching the glare." I cut the radio. My pulse was a hammer in my throat. The fog thickened until I could barely see the track ahead. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the metallic groan of another train, a sound too close to be real. It matched my speed perfectly. The rhythm of steel on steel echoing my wheels, as if a mirror engine was running beside me in the mist. I didn't look out the window. That's Rule 4, never try to find what's running parallel. The old-timers say there's another track out there, one only visible in the fog. The dead run it when they can't let go. By the time I reached the next checkpoint, the fog had lifted. My rear lights had burned out completely, but the frost remained, layered thick across the couplers like veins. I spent the rest of that trip shaking, repeating the rules to myself until I reached the port. After that night, I started keeping my own notebook. Every rule I learned from experience or rumor went into it. Because the company doesn't record them, they pretend this place obeys the same laws as everywhere else, but it doesn't. Up here, the world's thinner. Things slip through. Rule 5 came from a man named Barrett Sloan, a conductor who vanished near the Yukon Junction turntable in 1986. They found his train still running in circles around the yard, brakes disengaged. His logbook was inside the cab, the last entry written in pencil: "Don't answer when they knock." That sounds like a joke until you've spent a night alone in a steel cab with the windows fogged from your breath. Once, while waiting on a siding for a southbound freight, I heard a knock on the side door. 2 sharp raps, then 1 long. I thought it was another worker. When I opened the door, the snow outside was smooth, no footprints. The knocking started again, this time on the opposite side of the cab. I sat still, my hands on the brake lever, staring straight ahead until it stopped. I never checked the other side. When I pulled out of the siding 20 minutes later, I looked back and saw faint impressions along the rail, as if someone had walked beside me all the way out. The longer you work this line, the more you realize these rules aren't superstition, they're survival. The men who made them might have vanished, but their warning stuck because those of us who remain saw what happens when you don't listen. Rule 6 is mine: never leave your train unattended between 300 and 300 in February. I learned it last February, the night I almost didn't come back. We were hauling a short manifest train, supplies for a mining camp near the Western Ridge. Halfway there, I heard a clanging from one of the empty gondola cars. Sounded like chains hitting steel. I stopped to check, thinking maybe a loose coupling. I climbed down, boots sinking into snow, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The noise stopped the moment I stepped off the ladder. I walked along the cars, counting under my breath, light sweeping each coupling. The snow behind the train was unbroken. No wind, no marks. When I reached the end car, I saw the gate swinging gently, though there was no breeze. I caught it with my hand, then froze. There were fingerprints in the frost. Human-sized, but wrong. Too many joints, the fingers slightly curved backward. I dropped the flashlight. It landed beam up in the snow, lighting the undercarriage of the car. That's when I saw it. Something crouched beneath the frame, long-limbed, its head turned too far toward me. I didn't breathe. The thing shifted, slow and deliberate, like it was deciding whether to come out. I ran back to the cab without looking behind. Caleb wasn't there. He'd stayed behind in Kiln Bay that trip. I slammed the throttle forward and didn't stop until dawn. When I checked the train the next morning, every car door was sealed shut, frost welded along the seams. The only prints in the snow were mine, going one way. That was the last time I ever dismounted between 300 and 3:33 a.m. There are more rules, ones even I don't understand. I've heard whispers from maintenance crews, stories about trains that arrive before they're scheduled, about engineers who see their own engines passing in the night. The company says it's all confusion, but those of us who've ridden the Polaris long enough know better. You can't work this far north without realizing something. Ancient moves along these tracks. Maybe it's the land remembering. Maybe it's the weight of so many tons of steel pressing through wilderness that was never meant to be split. But every sound, the screech of brakes, the low moan of wind through the pine, feels like a language I'm not supposed to hear. I still take the night runs, still follow the rules. Because up here, the second you stop believing them is the second the tracks stop leading anywhere you recognize. 2 weeks after the Hollow Mare run, the company reassigned me to Night Freight 92, an 8-car consist hauling fuel and machinery north toward the mining settlements. Dispatch called it a routine rotation. Nothing is routine this far north. The Polaris doesn't forgive complacency, it tests it. The air that evening felt heavier than usual, thick with the metallic smell that always comes before snow. The forecast said clear, but that meant nothing. Up here, the weather decides when it wants to change. I started my pre-trip inspection, running my gloved hand along each coupler, checking the brake lines. Frost already crept across the steel, thin as breath. The sky above Dawson's Gate looked bruised, violet clouds rolling low. My engineer for this trip was a quiet man named Pike, new to the route but not to trains. He'd spent 20 years down in Ontario before transferring north for the higher pay. That extra pay is bait. It's what lures people into places that should have stayed untouched. By the time we cleared the yard, dusk had flattened the landscape. The tracks ahead disappeared into a tunnel of trees, branches glazed with ice. Pike set the throttle, the engine rumbling steady. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped fast, 10 degrees in minute. My breath fogged inside the cab. When we reached kilometer post 2 and 3, I noticed the snow along the embankment rippling like water. Pike leaned forward, squinting. "Wind?" he asked. I shook my head. There wasn't any. The treetops stood still. The ripples moved against the wind, flowing toward the track. I looked away immediately. Rule 2. Pike didn't. His jaw tightened, and I saw his eyes go glassy, like he was seeing something far away. I shouted his name. He blinked hard, breathing fast. There was someone. He started, then stopped. I told him not to describe it. Naming things gives them weight. Up here, that can be enough to call them back. We switched to auxiliary power when the main generator started flickering. Static buzzed through the radio again. It sounded like whispering at first, then we're throttled back. Brake. A man's voice, calm, instructive like dispatch. Pike reached for the mic, but I slapped his hand away. "Don't answer," I said. His eyes darted to me, confused. "Could be control," he muttered. "It isn't," I told him. "Not at this hour." I flipped the radio off completely. When I did, the whispering didn't stop. It continued, right inside the cab, as though the air itself was speaking. The words faded only when we crossed the trestle over Black Elk River. Sound carries differently over running water. That's one of those things no one writes down, but every conductor learns. After midnight, the fog returned. Thick, low, moving in slow tides across the tracks. I turned every light on. Headlamps, side floods, even the work lights along the freight cars. The fog reflected white, swallowing itself. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. The air grew unnaturally still. Even the hum of the engine felt muffled, like we were running underwater. Pike leaned closer to the windshield, straining to see. That's when the signal light ahead blinked green to red, twice, then stayed green. It wasn't supposed to. There were no switch yards within 30 miles. I checked the track diagram. Every signal in this section was automated and offline during the night runs. Pike slowed instinctively. I grabbed the lever. Rule 3, I reminded him. He hesitated, then nodded and throttled back up. We rolled through the light, and the color flickered once more, green to red to black, as we passed. Half a mile later, a faint clang echoed down the length of the train, metal on metal, traveling from the rear car forward. It wasn't the rhythm of wheels, it was deliberate. Something walking the roofs. I picked up the radio, tempted to call dispatch just to hear another voice, then remembered Sloane's rule. Don't answer when they knock. I kept my hand on the brake lever instead. Pike tried to joke. "Probably ice," he said, voice too thin to convince even himself. Then the sound stopped right above the cab. A shadow crossed the headlamp beam. A flicker, too quick to define. Something had leaned over the edge of the engine roof. Pike looked up just as a smear of frost crawled across the inside of the windshield. Spider, veined and fast, as if invisible fingers were dragging through it from outside. The temperature dropped again. Our breath turned to fog thick enough to hang. The frost on the glass formed shapes, circles, then slashes, then 4 vertical lines beside them. I counted them without meaning to. 4, like tallies. Then one more stroke appeared, dragging slow and deliberate through the condensation. 5. Stop the train, Pike whispered. I didn't. Instead, I shut my eyes and recited the rules silently. When I opened them, the marks had faded. The air smelled like iron. Pike swore softly, shaking. "What was that?" he said. "A warning," I answered. The rest of the run passed in silence until we reached the siding at Fox Hollow to let a southbound freight clear. We parked engine idling low. Pike stepped outside to smoke. I stayed in the cab, logbook open. The clock read 3:04 a.m., a dangerous window. I told him to wait until 30:34 if he wanted a break, but he waved me off. The moment his boots hit the snow, the lights flickered. I heard it, then a faint knock, 2 short, 1 long, exactly like before. I froze. It came from the rear of the train this time. Pike didn't seem to hear it. He was facing the tree line, lighter flame cupped in his hands. The knock came again, closer. My stomach turned cold. "Pike!" I yelled through the window. He looked up, startled. "What?" "Get back in." He frowned, then dropped the cigarette and climbed the ladder slowly, like he didn't want to turn his back on the trees. The moment he stepped inside, the knocking stopped. The engine's gauges flickered, then steadied. Pike sat down silent. After a while, he said, "There was someone standing at the tree line." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. At dawn, we reached the next station. The crew there said the southbound freight we were supposed to wait for never left its yard. No trains had run that section all night. Whatever signal we'd seen, whatever sound we'd heard, it didn't come from any real line. That day, I added 2 more notes to my book. Rule 7, never trust the signals after midnight. Rule 8, don't stop when the world goes quiet. It's listening. By spring, Pike had transferred back south. He didn't even pick up his last paycheck. The company didn't ask why. They never do. Conductors vanish from the roster, replaced by fresh names, and the trains keep running. I stayed. I can't explain why. Maybe I've been here too long. Maybe I'm part of the line now. Sometimes, I think the train knows me. How I breathe, how I hesitate before a curve. The wheels hum differently when I'm calm, louder when I'm not. On certain nights, I swear the sound matches my heartbeat. If I try to change the throttle rhythm, it adjusts back on its own. Last month, I met an old engineer at the Kiln Bay Diner. White beard, missing 3 fingers. He said he used to work the Polaris until the shadows started boarding. He told me to remember one more thing. The train doesn't just move through the land moves through it. I asked what he meant. He just smiled, eyes distant, and said, "You'll know when the tracks turn cold before the frost does." Then he left without paying for his coffee. He was right. I felt it 2 nights later, running light freight through the northern pass. The rail itself grew cold, colder than the air, cold enough to frost through the soles of my boots. The temperature in the cab held steady, yet my breath came out thick and white. Then the hum of the wheels changed, a deeper note, almost like the tone a tuning fork makes when struck against bone. I knew that sound. It meant we weren't alone on the rails anymore. Out the left window, a faint light flickered through the trees. Yellow, steady, too slow for headlights. Another train. But when I checked the log, no train was scheduled on our track for the next 6 hours. I leaned forward, and the light moved with us, staying parallel through the woods. Pike wasn't there to remind me of the rule, so I reminded myself, never look for what's running beside you. I tried not to, but curiosity is louder than fear. I turned my head just slightly. The light brightened. A shape formed around it, a train faint, translucent, like it was made of the fog itself. Cars gliding without sound, windows glowing with pale blue light. I saw silhouettes inside. People sitting perfectly still, faces turned toward me. Every one of them expressionless, as if waiting. Then the ghost train began to slow, drifting ahead of us, until its engine lined up with mine. Through its cab window I saw a conductor, his face nearly identical to my own. He raised his hand slowly, palm open. I felt my own hand lift against the glass, matching his without thinking. The moment our palms aligned, the ghost train vanished. The lights died. The rail beneath us thudded once, hard enough to rattle the gauges. Then silence. When I finally exhaled, the windshield was covered in frost letters. Simple, uneven, like written by a shaking hand. It spelled 2 words, "Stay awake." I didn't sleep for 2 days after that. I keep the phrase written at the front of my notebook now, right under the first rule about fog. The meaning shifts each time I read it. Maybe it's warning me not to fall asleep on duty. Or maybe it means something else. That staying awake is the only thing keeping me from crossing onto that other track completely. A week after the ghost train, I stopped pretending I understood where the border between real and not real sat anymore. The track still shone steel in daylight. The engine still rumbled like machines. But sometimes I could feel the weight of something older running with us, like the rails were remembering every mile ever crossed. The North does that to you. It wears down what's human until all that's left is the rhythm of motion. The company had me on solo runs again. Fuel tanks and lumber shipments to a camp called Lorne Ridge. It sat 80 miles past the last radio repeater, nothing but pines, ice, and a strip of rusted siding that curved into nowhere. They said the miners had pulled out months ago, but the orders kept coming to deliver supplies. I didn't argue. Conductors don't ask why freight goes where it does, we just follow the track. The first half of the run passed quiet. The snow was fine powder glinting under moonlight. Then, somewhere past kilometer post 249, the air thickened. Not fog smoke. It drifted across the rails sweet and wrong like burnt sap. I slowed the engine, leaning out the side window. The woods were dark, no fires visible, yet the smoke kept coming. It rose from the snow itself, curling in tendrils. Then I heard it, soft tapping on the roof in rhythm with the wheels. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap. Something walking above me again. I remembered the last time I'd heard that sound, how the frost had spelled tallies across the glass. I reached for the light switch, flooding the roof with glare. The tapping stopped. Silence stretched. My heart pounded so loud it drowned the engine. I didn't move. When the noise came again, it wasn't on the roof. It was under the train, metal dragging, slow and uneven, like chains caught on steel. I throttled forward, trying to shake it loose. The sound followed, matching our speed. Then, for a moment, I caught sight of something beneath the cars, shapes, hunched and pale, clinging to the undercarriage. Their arms were too long, their faces hidden behind frost. I blinked and they were gone, the chains still echoing. At Lorne Ridge, the siding was half buried in snow. No workers, no lights. The only thing waiting was a line of empty freight crates stacked beside the loading platform. I climbed down to inspect. The footprints I left filled instantly with frost, as if the ground was breathing cold upward. I pried open the nearest crate, empty. The second, empty. The third held something else, a train lantern, old-style, glass cracked. The flame still burning blue. That color wasn't right. Nothing burns blue in this cold unless it's gas. But the air around it shimmered with heat. I shut the lid fast. When I turned, I saw tracks in the snow behind the caboose. Not mine. Barefoot, long strides, toes splayed. They circled the engine once, then vanished into the tree line. I climbed back into the cab, locked every latch, and waited until the clock passed 3:34. I didn't sleep, didn't blink, just listened. The forest outside creaked like it was settling bones. By dawn, the smoke smell had faded. I logged the delivery as complete, though nothing was delivered. That's what the company wanted, paper-proof. Truth doesn't matter on the Polaris, only progress. That afternoon, dispatch radioed through static, asking if I could take an extra haul south to Kiln Bay, salvage cars from an abandoned wreck. I almost said no, but saying no to dispatch draws attention, and attention here is worse than ghosts. I agreed. The wreck sat 30 miles downline, near a section everyone called the Split. It's where the old route diverges from the new, a fork left unfinished after a landslide 30 years ago. The new line runs clean and smooth. The old one vanishes into forest, rails warped and swallowed by roots. According to records, no train has run that way since '91. Yet some nights, engineers still report seeing lights down that branch, moving slow, like a locomotive gliding through time that hasn't realized it ended. When I reached the Split, snow covered everything. Only the upper edge of the abandoned track showed, a pair of ghost rails vanishing beneath drifts. My assignment was to hook the first 2 salvage cars left there months back. Simple job. Except the moment I stepped out, the air turned wrong again. Too quiet, too hollow. Sound doesn't die here naturally. Something takes it. I worked fast, securing the couplers. As I crouched, my flashlight beam flicked across a piece of metal half buried in ice, an old engine plate, tarnished bronze. The serial number was familiar. I brushed frost away and froze. It matched the engine number from Darren's train, the one that disappeared years ago after stopping for the Red Lantern. This was it, or at least what was left of it. The freight cars beside it were split open, metal peeled like paper. Inside one, I saw shapes frozen into the walls, human outlines pressed into the steel, faces distorted, eyes wide. Frost had preserved them like insects in amber. I stumbled back, bile rising. When my boot hit the rail, it hummed underfoot. Then a voice crackled through my dead radio. "Don't take them." Darren's voice again, weak but clear. "They're still moving." The freight coupler shuddered, as if something inside the car was pushing against it. I dropped the latch and ran for the cab. Behind me, I heard the shriek of tearing metal. When I climbed the ladder, I looked back once and saw the wrecked car shift. The wall bulged outward from within, leaving a perfect handprint in the frost. The fingers tapped once, twice, 3 times, in the same rhythm as the knocks on my cab weeks earlier. I threw the engine into reverse and backed away from the split until the line curved out of sight. When I stopped, my headlights caught something glinting on the snow, the blue lantern, sitting upright on the rail. It hadn't been there before. I didn't open the cab door. I didn't breathe. Then the lantern's flame flickered, and the light split in two, doubling like a reflection. Behind the second flame, shadows moved. They looked like passengers stepping from a train that wasn't there. I left it. Drove straight through to Kiln Bay without stopping, the couplers rattling like teeth behind me. When I arrived, I filed my report, signed every form, and walked straight to the Depot bar. Pike was there, nursing something dark. He looked worse, eyes sunk, skin pale. I told him what I'd seen. He didn't laugh, just nodded and said, "They don't want us fixing what belongs to the old line." He pulled a small notebook from his coat, just like mine, rules scribbled through every page. Some matched mine, some I'd never heard before. He pointed to one in the middle: "Never touch anything that burns blue." Then another: "The dead routes don't forget their trains." Pike said there used to be 5 lines up here, all running different sectors. Over time, accidents shut them down one by one. But the tracks weren't removed, they were left to sink under snow. "They overlap now," he said, "like scars. Sometimes you're running on more than one at once, even if you can't see it." That night I dreamt of rails crossing beneath the earth, endless, tangled, glowing faint red like veins. Something moved along them, slow and patient, dragging chains that sparked when they scraped the steel. When I woke, the sound was still there, faint but real, echoing under the floor of my cabin. The next morning, I found frost marks on my door, 5 tallies, just like the ones that had formed on the windshield. I traced them with my glove. They were cold, deeper than frost should be. When I stepped back, the lines melted into words, thin as breath. They said, "Next stop." I didn't have a scheduled run that day. The morning after I found those frost words, I tried to tell myself it was sleep deprivation. My cabin walls creaked like they were breathing, the stove burned low, and the wind outside dragged along the siding like a slow hand. But the words kept forming behind my eyes every time I blinked. Next stop. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like an appointment. I called dispatch to confirm my schedule. They said I wasn't on rotation for another 2 days. That should have calmed me, but I've learned something here. If the line wants you, it doesn't wait for paperwork. By sundown, I got a ping on the company Pager emergency run. Route 3 North. Cargo clearance required before storm front. No signature, no instructions, just coordinates. Route 3 hadn't been used since last winter. It cuts through what the maps still call the Morin Pass. 30 miles of switchbacks and tunnels carved into the mountainside. The miners built it back when they thought the north was endless gold. Now it's just abandoned shafts and frostbite warnings. The track bends so sharp you can see your own headlights reflecting from the snowbanks ahead. I thought of ignoring the order, but ignoring orders means someone else gets sent instead. And if the line already marked me, it would just wait. By nightfall, I'd coupled a single engine and 1 freight car. The car was sealed, manifest listed only, survey equipment. I checked every latch anyway. The metal was colder than usual, cold enough to burn through gloves. When I stepped back, frost crawled across the coupler, forming tiny arcs, half circles like fingerprints. The yard master didn't meet my eye when he signed the release. Just said, "Keep the light on," and shut the window. The phrase felt heavier than it should have. I climbed aboard and pulled out at 1942, the wind already screaming through the valley. The first few miles were uneventful, the kind of quiet that makes you think maybe the stories are finally done with you. The mountains rose around me, pale ridges swallowing the last light. Inside the tunnels, the echo came back delayed. Half a second late, then a full second. By the fifth tunnel, the delay stopped matching at all. My engine sounded like it was being answered from farther down the line. I started counting the distance between each tunnel, checking the mileposts. The numbers didn't line up. They repeated 247 twice, then 248 twice more. I should have turned back. I didn't. When the radio flared, I almost didn't notice at first. Just static. Then the faint hum of my own voice played back, distorted, hollow. Then another voice over it. "You're late." I jerked the mic from its cradle. "Who is this?" I asked. The reply came instantly. "You were supposed to stop at Lorne Ridge." I cut the line, heart hammering. That voice wasn't mine, but it knew where I'd been. Half an hour later, I saw the first signal light ahead. Green, then yellow, then green again, flashing rhythmically. There shouldn't have been any signals this far north. The control board showed them offline. The closer I got, the faster they blinked. My headlights swept through the fog and caught something else. A figure standing beside the track, arm raised, holding a lantern. The light flickered blue. Rule 7, never trust the signals. Rule 8, don't stop when the world goes quiet. I kept my hand on the throttle, knuckles white, eyes locked forward. The figure didn't move. The lantern stayed lifted, swaying slightly with the wind. I pressed harder on the throttle. When we passed, the figure turned its head to follow me. I saw its face clearly for a heartbeat, no mouth, just smooth frost where one should have been. And the light of my engine passed right through it. The fog swallowed everything after that. The mountain curves twisted tighter, rails humming. Then I felt it. Weight in the rear car, a shift that tugged at the coupler like something heavy had just climbed aboard. I checked the gauges. Pressure dropped, slight but steady. I keyed the rear camera feed. Static. Then a flash, shapes moving inside the sealed car. Slow, deliberate. I grabbed the mic to call it in, but the radio screen flickered to life on its own. A single phrase scrolled across the display. "Don't open it." I stopped breathing. The words blinked twice, then vanished. The air inside the cab turned cold enough that the glass fogged from the outside in. I looked at my reflection in the windshield. For a moment, I wasn't alone. Another face stared back from behind my shoulder, identical to mine, but eyes pale as smoke. I turned, but the cab was empty. The train lurched, almost derailed. I slammed the emergency brake and felt every coupling strain. When we stopped, the world outside was dead silent. No wind, no engine rumble, just the slow tick of cooling metal. I stepped out with the lantern, light pooling weakly in the snow. The tunnel mouth behind us exhaled faint fog. The freight car door had cracked open, just an inch. I should have left it, but curiosity is a disease, and I've had it long enough to mistake it for duty. I pulled the latch. Inside was no cargo, no crates, no equipment. Just rows of seats bolted to the floor, like the interior of a passenger coach. Each seat was occupied. Frost-coated figures sat perfectly still, heads bowed, ice clinging to their lashes. The air smelled like rust and pine sap. I took one step inside and the lantern dimmed. One of the figures raised its head. The movement was so slow it barely looked real. Its eyes were empty holes, mouth frozen mid-breath. Then it spoke, voice scraping like wind through gravel. "You made it." Every muscle in me locked. The other heads turned toward me one by one, the sound of cracking ice filling the car. I stumbled back, slammed the door, and ran for the cab. The metal under my boots vibrated, the air thick with whispers that weren't words. I pulled the throttle forward, pushing the engine harder than I ever have. The freight car groaned, metal warping. Behind me, something slammed against the door from inside. Once, twice, then a rhythm like pounding fists. The sound followed me through the next 2 tunnels, echoing longer than it should have, chasing itself. When I finally broke into open snowfield again, dawn was just bleeding into the sky. The pounding had stopped. I looked back. The freight car was gone, coupler cleanly severed. The last tunnel behind me sat quiet, dark, its entrance rimmed in frost. Steam from my engine rolled into it, then vanished, swallowed without echo. I radioed dispatch when the signal came back. No answer. The static wasn't random anymore. It formed words. "Next stop," it said. Then again, clearer. "Next stop." I killed the power and coasted until the rail ran straight through the valley. The snow glowed faint blue, like reflecting light from something beneath. For a moment, I thought I saw rails running under the rails, dim lines crossing each other far below, pulsing faintly. The engine trembled like it recognized them. When I reached Kiln Bay, the station master was waiting. He said there was no record of my route that night. The manifest didn't exist. The yard log showed my engine still parked in Dawson's Gate at 1942. I told him that was impossible. He didn't argue. Just looked at me for a long time and said, "You look like someone who came back from too far." Then he handed me my next schedule slip. Blank, except for one printed word pending. That night in my cabin, I opened my rule book and added 3 new lines. Rule 9, don't trust your reflection after a run through moor and pass. Rule 10, never accept unscheduled cargo. Rule 11, if a train disappears, don't look for it. It's still moving somewhere. Outside, the wind began to hum, a low tone, steady and metallic. Like a faraway horn, I turned off the lamp. In the darkness, the sound seemed to circle the cabin. Then, faintly, a voice whispered through the walls. Not threatening, not kind, just certain. "You were late." I didn't sleep that night. The hum outside my cabin didn't fade. It only changed pitch, climbing and falling like a breath too slow to belong to wind. I sat by the window until dawn, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. Somewhere in the distance, a light moved along the horizon, pale and steady. At first, I thought it was a plane. Then it dipped, following the curve of the valley, too low for the sky and too smooth for headlights. It was moving along the rails. By sunrise, the light was gone, and the air felt emptied out, hollow in my lungs. The station master's words wouldn't leave me. "You look like someone who came back from too far." The way he said it made me wonder if he'd seen someone else do the same. I checked the rail outside the yard. There were 2 fresh tracks, side by side, one real, one etched faintly in frost. They ran parallel for a few meters before the second line faded into snow. The land remembers everything here, even what shouldn't exist. The company never mentioned my unscheduled run. No reprimand, no log entry, nothing. They pretended it hadn't happened, which somehow felt worse. The only thing that changed was my schedule. Instead of a few days off, I was suddenly reassigned to a through-line haul, Polaris north to the Yukon terminal. A 3-day trip straight through the spine of the territory. No radio coverage, no stops. The route went over the same valley I'd seen the light moving through. When I signed the manifest, I noticed the cargo listed again as survey equipment. I almost laughed. Whoever was assigning these didn't even bother with new lies. Still, I didn't argue. Some men avoid the unknown. I've learned to walk straight into it. Pretending it isn't there only makes it follow closer. I left the yard before sunset. The world was all white and iron. The train ahead of me looked endless, 30 cars long, every coupler tight, the sound of the wheels clacking like a pulse. My new engineer was a woman named Rhea. I'd never worked with her before. Short, quiet, eyes that didn't flinch easily. She'd run this line once, years back, and said she'd never do it again. When I asked why, she just said, "Because it doesn't end." I didn't ask her to explain. By the second night, we were deep in the interior. Snow so heavy it came down sideways. We hadn't seen a milepost in hours. Rhea stayed glued to the gauges, muttering to herself, her breath fogging the glass. I went to check the cars. Every latch was coated in ice, every door sealed with a thin crust of frost that hadn't been there when we departed. When I reached the middle of the train, I heard a noise. Steady, metallic, like someone striking the rail with a hammer once every few seconds. I leaned over the edge. The sound echoed from below the snowpack, not the rail itself. I crouched, pressing a glove to the ground. The vibration came through faintly rhythmic, like footsteps walking under the frozen earth. Then a voice rose faint through the metal. "Stay on the line." I stumbled back, slipped, and nearly fell. The air around me rippled with heat, though the temperature was below freezing. I climbed the ladder fast, slammed the cab door behind me. Rhea looked at me once, eyes narrowed, like she didn't need to ask. "You heard them too," she said. I nodded. She didn't look surprised. "They walk the buried track," she murmured. "The old ones." I wanted to ask what she meant, but before I could, the headlight dimmed. The fog rolled in, denser than before. It didn't drift. It held still, thick as cloth. The world outside vanished. The only sound left was the rhythm of our wheels and the faint hum beneath the floor, matching our speed exactly. I reached for the throttle, ready to slow. Rhea grabbed my wrist. "Don't," she said. "If you stop, you'll feel them climb." We rode blind for 10 minutes that felt like a lifetime. Then something flashed in the fog ahead. 2 pinpoints of light moving toward us down the track. I thought it was another train, but it wasn't moving right. The lights glided, floating too smooth. No sound of rails. They passed through us like breath through glass. For a moment, the cab filled with cold so sharp it burned. And then, layered under the sound of our own wheels, came another rhythm. Identical speed, identical distance, running parallel again. Rhea's hands trembled on the controls. "They're pacing us," she said. I didn't ask who. I already knew. The fog thinned just enough for me to see shapes flickering alongside. Rail cars made of mist, faint and ghost-lit, and inside, silhouettes of passengers. One of them had my face. The ghost train began to edge closer, closing the distance inch by inch until I could see the numbers on its engine. 7132. I knew that number. Darren's engine. I'd seen it on the wreck plate. The headlight glared so bright I had to shield my eyes. When I looked again, we weren't on the same track anymore. The rails had split. One turning right, one left. I hadn't thrown any switch. Rhea's voice broke through the radio. "It's taking us." The next few minutes were chaos. Wind roaring through the cab, though the windows were sealed. The wheels screaming like they were grinding through bone. The gauges spun into nonsense. Then the world snapped quiet. I looked out. The landscape had changed. No snow, no stars. Just black plains stretching forever, faint orange glow on the horizon like a city burning too far to reach. The tracks ran straight into it. Rhea whispered, "We're off the map." I don't know how long we kept moving. The sense of time flattened, the same mile replaying again and again, as though we were looping a film reel. Then, faintly, a sound rose through the wheels, voices chanting something slow and measured. It wasn't language I knew, but the cadence matched a signal pattern. 2 longs, 1 short, pause, repeat. I reached for the radio out of instinct. Static answered, then the same words I'd heard back in Morin Pass. "You were late." But this time, they added more. "You missed your stop." I looked at Rhea. Her lips were moving, silently repeating the words. When I tried to shake her, she didn't respond. Her eyes were open but unfocused, reflecting the orange glow outside. I slammed the brake, nothing happened. The engine didn't even resist. It just kept rolling forward, steady, inevitable. I hit the emergency switch. Dead. Everything in the cab powered down. Still, the train moved. I pulled the manual brake. The lever came free in my hand, clean brake. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. The window to my right began to frost over from the outside, the same 5 tallies forming again. Then, slowly, the lines curved into words. "Next stop." That's when I heard the whistle. It came from ahead this time, low and rising, mournful enough to make the air vibrate. A second later, the horizon brightened. A station emerged through the dark, wooden platform, flickering lamps, and a single sign half buried in Snow Kiln Bay. Only it wasn't the Kiln Bay I knew. The buildings were half rotted, the windows black. No people, no sound. The whistle began echoing from nowhere. The engine slowed on its own, easing to a stop beside the empty platform. Rhea turned to me, voice calm and distant. "We're home." I shook my head. "No, we're not." But she was already unbuckling, stepping toward the door. Her breath fogged once, then stopped entirely. When I grabbed her arm, her skin was ice cold. She smiled without looking at me and said, "It's been waiting." Then she opened the cab door and stepped down. The snow outside swallowed her soundlessly. The fog rolled back in, hiding her within seconds. I shouted her name until my voice broke. No answer. Just the hum under the rails returning, steady as before. I closed the door and locked it. Sat there until dawn, or whatever passed for it in that place. When the light finally shifted, the platform was gone. The world outside was just the Yukon Valley again, quiet and white, no sign of the ghost station. Ria's seat was empty. Her name disappeared from the crew list that morning, erased before I got back to the yard. I was the only one who remembered she existed. That night I added another rule. Rule 12. If the line wants someone, don't follow them off the train. They won't need a return ticket. The night after Ria vanished, I started hearing footsteps outside the cabin. Not cautious steps, not wandering wildlife. Just the steady rhythm of boots on gravel, pacing back and forth, keeping time with my heartbeat. I waited for the knock that never came. Whatever was out there didn't need to announce itself. It already knew I'd come close to stepping off. I lasted 2 days before the company called again. They don't say, "We need you." They just tell you where the next departure is. The voice on the phone wasn't anyone I recognized. Too smooth, too slow between syllables. "Manifest 97, it said. "Final delivery, departing tonight." Then silence. No click, no tone. Just gone. I should have refused. I didn't. Some part of me wanted to see how far the tracks went when they stopped pretending to lead anywhere. By dusk, I was back at the yard. The snow came down in long vertical lines, no wind, falling straight and heavy. The engine assigned to me wasn't one of ours. It looked older, paint scorched away, metal pitted like it had been dug up from under ice. The number plate reads 732. My breath caught. Darren's engine. I'd watched it disappear twice over. The logbook inside the cab still sat open, pencil frozen mid-sentence. The words were almost gone under layers of frost, but one line was still legible. "If you hear your own voice on the radio, don't answer." I should have walked away, but I didn't. I started the ignition. The engine groaned awake, reluctant but alive, like something breathing for the first time in years. The lights flickered, dim yellow. The control gauges didn't register anything real. No pressure, no speed, no coordinates. I put my hand on the throttle. The train began to move before I touched it. The rails outside the yard gleamed blue in the snowlight. I watched the landscape slide past slower than it should have, as if the world itself had forgotten how motion worked. The first few miles were familiar. Pine, ridge, the low curve near Hallamare. Then the trees began to thin, replaced by black stretches of open ground. The sky overhead wasn't sky anymore. It looked like static, white noise painted across space, pulsing faintly. The radio came alive. Conductor Harker. My name, spoken in my own voice. I didn't answer. "Conductor Harker," it repeated. "You're off route." I turned the volume down. The voice didn't fade. It came from somewhere deeper, vibrating through the cab. "You're late," it said softly. "They've been waiting." I tightened my grip on the throttle. "Ooh." The voice smiled through static. Everyone who missed their stop. The train began to accelerate, but the scenery outside didn't. The same stretch of track repeated the same curve. Same tree, same snowbank. I marked it in my mind the first time, counted seconds until it passed again. 10, 15, 20. Then the same shape reappeared. We were looping. The radio crackled. "You can get off now, Rowan. Just step outside when you hear the whistle." I almost laughed. I hadn't told anyone my first name since orientation 12 years ago. The voice changed then, lower, echoing as if more than one person was speaking at once. "Would keep what the line owe us." The horn blew once, low and long. The sound rolled through my chest. It didn't stop, it grew. Layers of tone, overlapping, until it became a scream. The glass rattled in its frame. I jammed my hands over my ears. Still, it vibrated through my bones. When it finally ended, I realized the lights were gone. The cab was pitch black except for the glow of frost crawling across the windows. I picked up the lantern. Its flame burned blue. The rule book in my coat pocket felt heavier than usual. I opened it, hands shaking. The pages were blank, every rule gone. In their place, a single phrase scrawled across the center. All lines meet. Outside, faint shapes began to form in the dark, tracks intersecting, hundreds of them, converging toward a single vanishing point ahead. The train rolled faster. The air grew hot. The steel underfoot groaned. For a second, I thought I could hear voices inside the rails themselves, whispering through the metal. Then the fog lifted, and the world ahead opened like a wound. A station stood in the distance, enormous, built of black iron and glass. Towers rose above it, lights burning deep red inside. The sign over the platform read Polaris Terminal. Beneath it, in smaller script, for departures only. The engine slowed without command. The platform came into view. Figures stood waiting. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, still as statues. Their skin was the color of frost, eyes pale and wide. Some wore conductor uniforms, others coats like miners, and some had faces I knew. Rhea among them, Caleb, even Darren. They all looked straight at me. None of them moved. The train hissed to a stop. The doors opened on their own. Rhea stepped forward first. Her voice was gentle, almost kind. "You kept the rules. That's why you made it here." I shook my head. "You're not real." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Neither are you. Not anymore." I backed into the cab. The radio flared bright, red light spilling from the dial. A voice whispered from it. "Caleb's this time. Conductor, manifest 97 delivered." The air in the cab turned heavy. My breath fogged thicker than before. The crowd began to move. Not walking, drifting. Their feet never touched the ground. They approached the engine, hundreds of them, each face blank until the lantern light hit it. Then they changed. One by one, their faces became mine. I slammed the door and threw the throttle forward. The train resisted, wheels spinning on the track, shrieking sparks. Then it lurched forward, breaking free from the platform. The figures didn't chase. They just watched as I pulled away. Rhea raised her hand, palm open, the same gesture I'd seen from the ghost conductor. For a moment, I thought I saw the same frost glow forming around her fingers. Then she turned and disappeared into the station. I didn't look back. The track ahead split again and again, branches veering off in every direction, merging, overlapping. The sound of the wheels shifted pitch until it stopped sounding like steel at all. It sounded like breathing. The train moved faster, but the horizon never changed. I realized what the rule book had meant. All lines meet. They didn't mean geography, they meant endings. I reached for the brake out of instinct. My hand passed through it. The lever wasn't there anymore, just air. I looked down. The floor beneath my boots shimmered faintly, like light under shallow water. The metal around me was becoming transparent, my reflection fading from the glass. Then, a voice I hadn't heard before, low, steady, almost kind, rose through the static. "You can stop running now." The world flickered. The cab filled with light, white, clean, absolute. And then I was standing on a siding outside Dawson's Gate, morning light sharp and clear, frost clinging to my coat. The engine idled beside me, its paint bright and new. No rust, no scorch marks. A yard worker waved from the platform, clipboard in hand. "You're cleared for run 92, he said, northbound. "Weather looks good today." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My throat ached like I hadn't used it in years. I looked down at my hands. They were clean, no frostbite, no blood. The rule book in my pocket felt warm. I opened it. The pages were filled again. Same handwriting. Same list of rules. But one line had changed at the bottom. Rule 13's, when the train lets you off, don't stay too long. It always comes back for what's missing. The worker called again. "You ready?" "Conductor." I nodded before I knew why. Climbed the ladder, sat in the cab. The seat was still warm. When I turned the ignition, the radio hissed softly. Then a voice came through, my own voice, calm, steady, recorded long ago. "My name is Rowan Harker. I am a freight train conductor assigned to the northernmost line that still cuts through the Canadian wilderness. The company calls it the Polaris Route." The words continued on their own, perfectly matching the first log I'd ever recorded. I tried to turn the dial, but the volume only grew louder. My reflection in the windshield smiled a half-second too late. Outside, the signal turned green. The whistle blew once, and the train began to move. The yard worker's voice faded behind me as the train rolled out of Dawson's Gate again. Everything looked normal. The same ridges, the same steel shimmer under frost, but the air felt thinner. The radio kept replaying that old log of my voice. When it finally clicked off, the silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. I thought about shutting the engine down and walking back to the station, but something in me knew I wouldn't find it where I left it. I kept driving north. The first few miles came easy, mechanical. My hands remembered what to do even if I didn't. I glanced down at the gauges. They were all frozen at 0, though the train was moving steady. My reflection in the glove again, too still, breathing just out of sync. I turned my head fast, caught nothing behind me but the hum of the engine. I told myself I'd just take this one run and be done. Park the engine in Kiln Bay. Hand in my badge, disappear south. It sounded sane, but sanity's thin up here. It wears through like paint. By the second hour, the snow started falling harder. The horizon vanished. I knew this stretch by heart, yet the mile markers didn't match the map anymore. 204, 143, 241 again, my breath caught. The rails ahead glowed faintly blue. I flicked the headlight off. Rule 1 still lived somewhere in me, and the glow didn't fade. It was coming from the rails themselves. The radio turned on again, no static this time. Just a single voice whispering through, slow, drawn out, "Conductor." It wasn't mine. Then another voice layered over it. "Manifest 97, arrived." And another. "Run 92, departed." Then dozens of them, each speaking different routes, all blending into one chorus until the words became noise. I hit the power. The switch sparked in my hand. The voices kept talking. Through the windshield movement, something running beside the train, just out of sight. I didn't look. I couldn't. The window began to fog. 5 tallies appeared again, then 6, then 7. I wiped the glass, but the frost formed faster than I could clear it, the marks stretching upward until they reached the roof. A sound followed, a faint scrape of metal on metal, not from the track but above it, like hooks dragging along the roof of every car. I pushed the throttle. The sound kept pace. Then I heard another train's horn in the distance, low, deep, calling from somewhere ahead. It didn't fade. It grew louder until the sound became unbearable, vibrating through my teeth. The air shimmered, and I saw lights, 2 beams, white and sharp, bearing straight toward me on the same track. Instinct said brake. Another instinct, older, buried, said don't. I closed my eyes, whispered the first rule under my breath, and waited for impact. There wasn't one. When I opened my eyes, the other train was gone, and the snow outside was gone too. The world had turned black and copper, like the color of rust under flame. The rails glowed red hot ahead of me, stretching into a distance that pulsed faintly like veins. My skin prickled. I looked down. Frost had formed on my sleeves again, only it wasn't frost, it was ash. The radio hummed softly, then a man's voice. "We told you to keep the light on." I knew that tone, Caleb. "You shouldn't have looked," he said. "Now you'll see how it ends." The train slowed itself again, gears grinding against the metal. The heat faded, the light dimmed, and shapes began to emerge ahead. Station. Black silhouette against orange haze. No name on the sign this time, just a number 0. The platform was empty except for one person standing at the center, holding a lantern. I thought it might be Rhea, but as I drew closer, I saw it wasn't. It was me. He stood there calm, waiting. The lantern's flame burned white. He lifted it in a slow, deliberate motion, and the engine obeyed, rolling to a stop. I didn't tell it to. The air felt thick enough to touch. Every sound stretched thin until silence snapped over it. My reflection spoke first. "You made it this far. That's more than most. What is this place?" I asked. He smiled like he already knew my next question. "It's where the lines meet." "I'm still alive," I said. He tilted his head, as if that was the only thing I'd gotten wrong. Alive is just the word you use when the train hasn't stopped for you yet. The whistle blew once, soft and low. Behind me, doors opened on their own. Steam rolled out, curling around my boots. Who are they? I asked. The ones who followed the rules, he said. The ones who didn't. He raised the lantern higher. The flame flickered blue now, the same color I'd seen back at Lorne Ridge. The air rippled with heat. I took a step back. You'll forget, he said. You'll ride again. The line doesn't care what face you wear. It just needs conductors. He held out the lantern. Your turn. Every instinct screamed not to take it. But something colder than fear rooted me in place. My hand lifted on its own, palm open, mirroring his. When our fingers touched the handle, the flame surged white, swallowing both of us in light. Then everything went quiet. When the world returned, I was sitting in the cab again. The gauges blinked. The air smelled of oil and snow. The radio crackled once, then a voice, female this time, nervous, said, "This is Rhea. Copy control. I've got eyes on the North Line. Is anyone receiving?" Static. Then my own voice answered her. "Proceed, conductor." I didn't mean to say it. The words just left me easy as breathing. The windshield reflected her face in the frost. Different woman, same fear, and behind it, my reflection smiled again, slow and wrong. The whistle blew once. Lights came on across the length of the train, white and steady. The rails ahead glowed faint blue in the dark. I checked my coat pocket. The rule book was gone. In its place, a slip of paper with one line written in pencil, Rule 1, keep the train running. Outside, snow began to fall again, straight down, no wind. The radio whispered fragments of routes, numbers, names, all blending into a hum that sounded almost like language. Somewhere beneath it, a heartbeat pulsed through the steel. My hands found the throttle. I felt no choice in it. When I looked up, the signal ahead flashed green to green, then stayed steady. The engine's hum deepened. The lantern on the control panel, Caleb's old one, flickered once, flame still white. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw faces in the glass, hundreds of them overlapping, eyes wide and waiting. Then the reflection steadied. Only mine remained. The voice returned, quiet, close, just over my shoulder. "Welcome back, conductor." The train began to move. We left Dawson's Gate behind. The landscape outside folded over itself, the horizon stretching and closing like breathing. I couldn't tell if I was heading north anymore, or if the tracks had curved back into themselves like a circle. The snow thickened. The light dimmed. Ahead, faint and distant, I saw the outline of another engine running parallel. It matched our speed perfectly, its windows glowing faint blue. I didn't look too long. Some habits stay even when everything else unravels. The rails hummed. The wheels found their rhythm. The fog began to rise again, and for the first time in a long time I didn't feel afraid. Just part of the motion. Just another echo among many. The line was never meant to end. It was meant to keep running. I whispered to the empty cab, not sure if I was warning or remembering. Never ride through the fog without a light on every car. The sound of my voice carried forward through the mist, blending with the wind until it didn't sound like me at all. Somewhere up ahead, another conductor would hear it and write it down. Maybe he'd call it superstition. Maybe he'd add it to a list. Either way, the train kept moving north, and the light never went out.